From training to performing, join our big league conversation. Welcome to the CSP Elite Baseball Development Podcast with your host, Eric Cressey.
Welcome back to the CSP Elite Baseball Development Podcast. I'm your host, Eric Cressey, and this is episode 53. We've got one of my favorite people from the baseball world on the show today, a really accomplished college baseball coach who will share some tremendous insights, not just on player development and coaching, but also some strategies for parents as they navigate the college recruiting process. And I think he's got some really good insights in light of the uncertain times in the world today, what it means for college baseball, both players and coaches as we move forward. So we're in for a real treat with this one. In lieu of a sponsor this week, I wanted to give you a heads up on something that we're just starting to offer. You see, since we opened Cressey Sports Performance in 2007, we've offered distance-based online training. However, because we were sticklers for quality control, we only made it available to those who'd first visited one of our facilities for an in-person evaluation and some technique coaching. Basically, we didn't want to water it down when we were really proud of the product. We wanted to make sure that everything that we sent out into the world was really representative of our philosophies. That said, over the years, we have created systems that have allowed us to work from afar with folks all over the world. These clients range from Cy Young Award winners to Olympians to triathletes to weekend warriors. And of course, the majority are baseball players, which is our most well-known area of expertise. Recently, we toyed with the idea of expanding our online offering, but we were waiting for the right time to do that. And given the circumstances surrounding the current pandemic, it seems like that time is now. You see, with all the cancellations and postponements in the baseball world over the past few months, we've been fielding hundreds of inquiries from players, parents, and coaches who are seeking direction as they prepare for uncertain baseball futures. And in many cases, they're doing so with very limited equipment availability. We're here to help. With that said, you can now work directly with Cressey Sports Performance coaches via online consulting. To learn more and see if it's the right fit for you, please shoot us an email at csp.trainonline@gmail.com. Again, that's csp.trainonline@gmail.com. And just tell us a little bit about yourself. We're confident that we can meet you where you are and help you get to where you want to be. Again, that's csp.trainonline@gmail.com. We hope to hear from you soon. Today's guest played his college baseball and received an undergraduate degree at Birmingham Southern. He also completed a master's degree in sports administration at the University of Alabama, Birmingham. He started his college coaching career as a pitching coach at Huntington College in Alabama in 1993 before returning to Birmingham Southern for 3 years. He briefly coached at Jefferson State before returning to Birmingham Southern as a top assistant for 4 years of the most successful time in program history. In this span, the team won 196 games, 4 Trans-South Conference championships, and made 3 consecutive appearances in the NAIA World Series. Their 2001 team posted a school best 55-11 mark and captured the NAIA National Championship. Thereafter, in 2002, he was hired as a pitching coach and recruiting coordinator at the University of Georgia, where he was for 4 years. He then spent 3 seasons as an assistant coach and recruiting coordinator at Auburn from 2006 to 2008, before heading to Mississippi State for 7 seasons as both associate head coach and pitching coach. In 7 seasons at Mississippi State, he made 4 NCAA regional trips, 2 super regionals, and won the SEC tournament and advanced to the College World Series in 2013. He returned to Auburn as a head coach in 2015 and holds that title to this day. Along the way, he has coached 27 Division I All-Americans, 39 All-Conference performers, and seen 14 of his former pitchers make their Major League debuts, including 8 since 2014. Perhaps most interestingly to the context of our developmental discussion with this podcast, he has also turned 31 pitchers who went undrafted out of high school into MLB draft picks, including the number 1 overall pick in the 2018 MLB draft, Casey Mize. He's also one of the absolute best people in the industry. I got to know him well while I was working with Team USA in 2015, and we've stayed good friends all along. He's also the dad of 3 daughters, so we've got that in common. I think you're going to really like this show. Please welcome to the show, Butch Thompson. Welcome to the show, Butch. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Eric.
I'm very excited for our chats. We've always had a lot of good discussions, whether it's at Pitchapalooza or USA Baseball or a million other times I've seen you. So I appreciate you taking the time.
and we can go in a lot of different directions with this, but I think I want to start with, let's talk about your path to coaching. How did you initially make the transition, from playing to coaching, and what drew you into it?
I guess I can start by making it funny, right? When you know that you have never been from Little League all the way up through college, when you know you've never been the best player on your team, you probably need a plan B. I always dreamed of being a major league ball player like everybody else and doing all these things as a ball player. And I played every day that I possibly could until they told me that I couldn't play anymore. But there was always in the back of my mind, I think I figured out identity a little bit sooner, maybe than some others. My senior year of high school, I was coaching spring football. Mm-hmm. I loved my coaches. I always, the coaches that motivated me, the coaches that made me, feel special. Sport, I don't think it was all bad. Sometimes we say that's a negative to get your identity wrapped up into sport. Now that I've been doing it, my whole career, I don't think it was a negative necessarily for me, but even in college, between my junior and senior year of college, while everybody's going to the Cape Cod or, all these great collegiate leagues throughout the country, I went back home to Amory, Mississippi and started my Legion team there, with 15, 16-year-olds and was coaching while I still had another year to play college baseball. So I always had that little microchip and wired that way. I was, like I said, never the best player on my team, but I was the, captain of my high school football team, my junior college team. Just, that was always kind of the skill set that I had. And I think I figured it out early.
It's funny. There was a book, it's called The Captain's Class. It's an awesome read. And I read it a couple of years ago, and I remember they looked at, I think it was the top 25 teams in the history of sports. So it was Michael Jordan's Bulls. It was, the Brazilian national team under Pele. And one of the things that they talked about was one of the commonalities of a lot of those teams was that the best player was never the captain. It was, they talked about, everybody thinks Jordan was the captain of that Bulls. It was actually Bill Cartwright. And I think there's something to be said. It's hard to be the best player and the best leader at the same time. Would you agree with that in your coaching experience and your own kind of personal experience?
Every team, it wasn't always that first rounder or that first pick or that, bona fide All-American. Mm-hmm. The glue of every team that I've coached has always been that guy that, maybe the fans, maybe outside of that locker room, people didn't recognize the value that if that person wasn't there, this thing would be a house of cards. So I not only agree with you, I would say I've seen it my entire career that you are built around one strong guy that he can connect the top, the middle, and the bottom and bring them together. And the best teams has been a guy that's had the ability to do that. And that's not saying the best player, it's not just, he's a me guy. That's not saying that at all, but he's so captivated into doing whatever he's got to do on a daily basis to get prepared to make us great by what he physically does. But that captain's always galvanizing and keeping the top, middle, and bottom connected in some, synergy way. That 1 + 1 = 3 happens with that captain in the locker room.
I'm actually really interested. There's a lot of talk about the concept of range, given the book that just came out, the idea of being a generalist versus a specialist. And I think, you look at a lot of the head coaches out there. I think of Mark Calvi, obviously you, guys who were successful pitching coaches before they were head coaches. When you first got into coaching, did you look at it very generally? Were you coaching an entire team, or did you hone in on the pitching coach aspect of it and become very specialized before you came full circle and got back into head coaching?
Yeah, it was one of my regrets. A couple of ways. What you can and can't do kind of opens and closes doors. Mm-hmm. So, if you threw over 85 miles per hour, I really couldn't get my bat in position. So, I got the slow bat, so they quit letting me hit. Once you get out of junior college, you're like, yeah, you can't hit anymore. The game's passed you by. And pitching a little bit longer, it's like, okay, I need to specialize. I need to do the best I can to build a space in here and create a career. So it was, the game kind of took me into the pitching and trying to be a specialist in that area. And it's really one of my biggest regrets, because I would say that, I grew up in a mobile home and grew up in Mississippi and all those things that everybody, once they feel like they get to a certain stage, they brag about their humble beginnings. Mm-hmm. But, I was in a position to where, I have to make this work, mm-hmm. or I have to go back home. And my regret is probably my first, I don't know how long, 5, 6 years, let's just say. It was all about what can I do to provide for myself, make a name for myself, bust into this industry, take it by storm.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that put the player first in the whole heart. I've always cared. I've always respected, and I always loved the profession of coaching. But I wish I could have those 5 or 6 years back now that I'm 30 years into it, and I could go back and what I've learned from those first 5 or 6 years, where I think it was a little too much about me.
Mm-hmm.
And when you make it about teaching a player how you take a young person to become a man, and you're teaching them ultimately how to run their own show where they don't need you anymore, that's the mark of a coach. Those first 5 years, I was trying to make a name for myself, and I regret that.
Do you think, obviously you've come full circle in the sense that you worked as a pitching coach at Auburn, at Georgia, at Mississippi State. Now you're at Auburn as a head coach. Were there growing pains going to the head coach role? Having been very focused on the pitchers, only for all that time period where you had to, go through a learning curve right as you shifted into the head coach role?
I was assistant for 23 years. So if I'm ever going to be prepared to be a head coach, I couldn't have used any more time to do it. Actually, I was a junior college head coach when I was 25,
cool.
and I'm like, I'll be a head coach forever.
Yep.
And then you start on this 23-year journey of being an assistant coach. The biggest thing that hit me, and I would say this for every assistant, I became a head coach in the SEC when I quit pursuing it.
Mm-hmm.
I started having, whatever it is now, it's 8 or 9 pitchers make it to the big leagues in the last 4 or 5 years because it was about their journey and not mine. Mm-hmm. When I gave up that deal, I wanted to be a head coach for so long. And that seems to really be the pursuit. When I blocked that out and just, you've heard this saying over and over, you just try to do a good job where your feet are planted, things happen. Mm-hmm. But what I didn't realize becoming a head coach is I've been right next door. Mm-hmm. With John Cohen, I'm his associate head coach. With Tom Slater at Auburn, I'm in the office next door. With Dave Perno, with Brian Shoup, I'm in the office next door to all of those men. And I didn't realize all the stuff that was in their brain. Mm-hmm. If you can handle something, not keeping anything, but there's so much that we can do to help our head coach. That we don't have to just take everything to him.
Yep.
I didn't realize how much was going on and how many boxes were being checked and how many rooms were open in a head coach's brain, from vending to donors. And as a pitching coach, you are specifically just drilling down like, the spin and this ball and this pitch. As a head coach, you're not only thinking about that, you're thinking about the emails that you've got and the people that you're accountable to above, and the people that's paid money and invested and drove 3 or 4 hours and making a decision. The weather's been the hardest thing I've had to deal with thinking about as a head coach that I've never thought about as an assistant.
There's a saying I think I remember reading in like the world of kind of entrepreneurship and career growth is, if you want to have job security forever, figure out what your boss hates the most and get really good at it and take it off its plate. And I always come back to in entrepreneurship or in any like small business or any business for that matter. Michael Gerber wrote a book called The E-Myth, and he talked about it. Every successful business, there's 3 things. There's the technician, the entrepreneur, and the manager, right? So, if you're looking at this as like a college baseball program, right, the technician is the coaches on the field, making sure that, players are playing well, they're learning, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The entrepreneur is the one that has to go to donors, right? That has to help, get funding, also has to grow the program on the recruiting side of things. And then there's the managerial side. The head coach has got to oversee the rest of the coaching staff. They've got to oversee the budget, all those. And if you look at it from that perspective, like, coaches can really break through if they understand what they're really good at underneath that umbrella, and more importantly, probably what the head coach absolutely hates to do, right?
Yeah. And, if I ever go back, if my journey takes me back to being an assistant coach, I would be better in that category of helping and serving at a higher level by having sit in the head coach's chair and understanding what's really going on in that head coach's mind.
That's great. All right, so we're gonna shift gears and we're gonna talk about pitching, because let's be honest, most of the people listening to this are probably pitchers, parents of pitchers, and or coaches who may be trying to impact those folks. So, before you ascended to the head coach role, you were at Auburn, you were known as one of the top pitching coaches in the country. And you've seen a lot of pitching change since your first coaching opportunity back in 1993. So what are some of the non-negotiables? What are the things that from a pitching development and evaluation standpoint have not changed over the course of those, 30 years or so?
Yeah, I think we were saying spin before we started measuring spin.
Yeah.
And we started putting it into RPMs. I think we knew when a ball had ride and when a ball was sinking and when things were happening. We had the old school terms for that. I love that we've gotten to a point during my coaching career where we, have some numerics and we define that a little bit. Now, I think there's some more steps to figure out, how to add and how to tweak and what to do. But I think spin has always been there, and I love it because I think it can develop some identity with the pitcher now. Because the younger any man in living life, any ball player that wants to be great, and you use the word specialist or specializing, you've got to know who you are.
Yeah.
Bruce Lee. I love the saying. I'm not scared of the man that's done, 10,000 kicks one time. I'm scared of the man that's done one kick 10,000 times.
Absolutely.
And if you're trying something new all the time, and you're throwing four seamers with no spin, and you're throwing sinkers with high spin, it's like an identity crisis. So, to know when somebody's got low spin, I think of a Kendall Graveman. It's a big leaguer now that I was fortunate enough to be around for 4 years. The ball would sink, and every time we'd go up, he's backing up all the bases. And, once the spin and everything, the TrackMan came into play, then, we got like 1950 on our spin rate, below 2,000. So, hey, let's go be the best sinker ball pitcher in America.
Absolutely.
Jonathan Holder, I think you will probably be working with Jonathan now.
We spent a lot of quality time together. Great guy.
One of my favorite guys I've ever coached. He started his college career with 27 scoreless innings as a reliever. So that's almost getting through your entire freshman year, I think, till postseason. But Jonathan had this uncanny four-seam fastball with a high spin and, this vertical break on a breaking ball. And, that was his setup. And these two guys played on the same team, but they were completely different style pitchers. I love where spin has helped us create some identity. I kind of believe from thinking back through the years, what I discovered, because I got a great head start on the TrackMan being at Mississippi State, and we were able to have one of the first ones the first year. I think it was like LSU, UCLA, Arkansas, maybe 8 schools in the country had this technology to try out and get started with, and we dove into it. We immersed ourselves into it. I think proper timing is huge.
Yeah.
I think that covers up a lot, because I think about Dr. Andrews. I've come full circle now where Dr. Andrews is still my team doctor here at Auburn, which is amazing. And I really think about my time when I was a pitching coach at Birmingham Southern. I'd go cross town, to his institute over there that really got things started. And, I think about Dr. Glenn Fleissig and Dr. Rafael Escamilla, and just trying to be a sponge with those guys as they were doing things. And then, as I developed in coaching, I get to speak at the National Coaches Convention, I think in Chicago, about 2012. And, I kind of tried to build something off, hey, you can never repeat the same delivery twice. And, I think we've over mechanicized a lot of things. And I don't even think I can pick up my pen right now and autograph my name 50 times and never do it the same way twice.
That's true.
So, I asked Dr. Fleissig, because they've been doing the kinetics, the motion analysis forever. And has anybody ever repeated the same delivery twice? And he said no. And, but he said, just be careful. And I said, well, who gets closest at doing it? Who's the best at repeating a delivery? And that's where he mentioned, a 35-year-old man, because how many hours and thousands of hours. And I know we bring the whole Malcolm Gladwell thing in here to, the power 10,000. Is it true? Is it accurate? I could be pitching for 40,000 hours and I wouldn't be good enough to pitch in the big leagues. There's some required baseline skill, I think, and gifts that are part of it, not just hard work. But when you can never repeat the same delivery twice, what is the pursuit? So I should have started there, because I think people are on a pursuit of repeating that same delivery twice, especially with young amateur people. And they mimic, they look alike, there's similarities. I love all that, but I think it's a trap. I think it's a crutch. So I love spin. I think proper timing and rhythm and breathing and the talent of command. It gets a little old, and I think you've heard. I've been so impressed with you, Eric, with seeing you. It was one thing to see at USA Baseball. It's another thing to get online and read and try to learn from you, which I have, and so many people listening to you have.
Thank you.
I think the most impressed I've ever been with you is when you allowed me to come to Atlanta and watch you with a group of physical therapists. And those people, those really smart, sharp people are hanging on every one of your words. You're, I'm like, all right, Eric's pretty cool. We're hanging out here and we're doing USA Baseball, but then we're back over here. And, he's a strength coach. He's good. But then I see you in a room with physical therapists. Not many people can do that. I could hold myself in a room with other pitching coaches, but for me to walk into another room, another expertise, and control the room and lead the room, and people be learning from me and another skill, I've never been so impressed.
Well, thank you. I think that's, it's something you do without even realizing it, right? I think there's teaching your players, but then there's also teaching your coaches, the future of the industry. And I think, we definitely, whether we outwardly speak of it, we have an understanding as an industry that we do have to pay it forward and have those conversations and share our mistakes and, what we've learned from. Like, hey, I was an idiot. I did sleeper stretch till the cows came home from 2007 to 2009 and probably messed up some shoulders in the process until we found better ways. And I'm sure you look back on your coaching career and there are things that you taught that you're, man, if I had a Rapsodo 20 years ago, I would have changed this kid's career. And that's what motivates you, right?
Yep. I think about when I got started, I didn't know everything when I got started. So who is it? It's Pat McMahon. It's Darren Schoenrock. Those are the men that kind of, we talked about a drop step and come to balance and break the power and throw and finish and, those things. And I'm just saying 30 years later, it's like, another place I was headed is like, man, a lot of guys can throw 90 to 95 now, more than ever in history. But, and we talk about command. That's another one of my big things is, do you have authority over the baseball? And I wish we could put a number to it. He throws 95, but he's got, 78 command. And, I want 95 command. I want to start speaking in terms of that because that's how other people are speaking. And then, I do think pitchers grow so much in college. I think gradual development sometimes is better than just, hey, you need to go gain 30 pounds of muscle. I'll give you 2.5 weeks. But this mass equals gas is another big one for me. So, spin, proper timing, talent of command, the breathe, the rhythm, and then that ground up core strength is kind of held the test of time for me.
I'm curious, you mentioned, 8 or 9 big leaguers over the past 4 years. You obviously had a first overall pick in Casey Mize. One of the resounding themes that I've noticed, and we actually, talked about it on a couple of recent podcasts, is just the idea of like late bloomers. Like people very rarely talk about, Justin Verlander being, I think he was like 86 to 88 when he went to Old Dominion. How many of those guys, I mean, you've seen so many big leaguers over the years, how many of them were absolute studs coming in versus guys that were, they were 87 to 90 with maybe a decent secondary pitch that went on and surged? I'm always curious.
Yeah. I again, where I'm hung up on identity. And really, I stripped those guys for the most part. So I took all these quadrants away from Kendall Graveman, if that makes sense. So we go sinker and slider, and we're splitting the plate. Nothing magical. We try to get those balls to start sharing space out of the hand, and ever how long we can do that's to our advantage. It's like adding some type of perceived velocity because now the velocity is when the hitter's got it. I think a coach provides direction. and then you let them roll. I really want to remember who said, basically, we are just the guardrails. I can't take credit for that. I steal everything I can get that I like, just like everybody does.
Yep.
Jonathan Holder. Okay, we don't need these 4 or 5 pitches. Jacob Lindgren. I know you're a starter at 90% of college baseball, but let's just get 2 pitches going. You can still be the Yankees' first pick. Didn't know it at the time. And, really, you think about, maybe mom and dad, because dad was a great ball player himself. It's like, that was a lot of trust,
Yeah.
to do that. But we've stripped them. I can't say that I thought Brandon Woodruff was going to be a big leaguer. But he pitched the least for us in college. All those guys pitched a lot more because Brandon threw 5 innings his senior year of high school because nobody could catch him at his small Mississippi high school. And just for him to get to his identity, for him to get to his direction, it took a little bit longer. But you could just see this, he's like you draw up the perfect picture. This is a real man, a real frame.
Yep.
He does his work easy. It looks like he's playing catch. And I'm like, this guy, if he is still allowed to play and has a uniform on, he's going to make it. And so I get caught up into thinking, I think Woodruff always looked like a big leaguer. The Brewers saw it. But all these guys were just, Kendall Graveman's 165 pounds coming out of high school. Jonathan Holder, we almost, after his freshman fall, he wanted to be an outfielder too. So the pitching was lagging behind. There's no identity, no definition, no recipe. Hey, go home and talk to your parents this weekend, around Thanksgiving, and then come back and see if you want to maybe go to a junior college year. And then he jumps out his freshman year because we're super coaches and we know so much, and throws 27 scoreless and has 39 saves, in the SEC after 3 years. So it's amazing. The recipe, the identity, and knowing specifically who you are can make a ton of guys jump.
Would you say, we talked about spin quite a bit so far, and I'm always intrigued at the perspectives of pro guys. We talked to Adam Ottavino, Mike Soroka. Both those guys talk about just always like playing games, messing around in the backyard, like learning how to manipulate the baseball differently. When you see those guys that are able to really spin the ball at an elite rate, whether it's with a 4-seam or with, obviously a secondary pitch, are those guys that always just tinkered with it? Or were they guys where, they came to school and there was one magical moment where they figured out a new grip or a new cue and everything changed for them?
I think you're just trying to keep from being an average bear.
Yeah.
I think if you got high spin, that's great. We can work with it. If you have a low spin, then maybe quit trying to act like him with all that spin over there. You're just trying to stay out of those mid ranges is what we started finding. I'm looking forward to what the next level is of what we learn. Some of the sidearm and guys maybe pitching as far as you can to the right is an advantage for some because you're not average stuff coming out like, every hitter, I think, coming up, especially as an amateur, it's like they have their own computer where they've seen this average right-hander a majority of the time for the most of their career. A lefty throws them for a loop, and anybody that pitches from any extreme throws anybody for a loop because there's not enough information or at bats against uniqueness, if that makes sense. So, if you're going to be vanilla delivery and vanilla velocity and vanilla spin, you're going to have to do something or figure it out, or you're going to get vanilla results, in my opinion. And I know it's a basic way to look at it, but I believe that to be true.
I love that. Now, we talked about the concept of just don't be average, be different in some way, whether that's a big time sinking fastball or a 4-seam that takes off or something that's got some natural cut. But you also are well known for your understanding of how to create elite submarine and sidearm pitchers. And I know you've had some success that you've spoken at it at some different conferences we've both been at. So what are some things that you look at as you determine whether someone's a good fit for trying to drop down, whether that's in terms of trunk tilt with the same arm slot or an actual lower arm slot?
Well, I'm such a genius that here's what I did. I'm sitting here and I'm watching. I'm a pitching coach in the SEC. and I'm watching Ray Tanner win back-to-back national championships. I'm watching him with, a couple of guys with, 40 and 50 appearances in college baseball, running 80-82 that are submarine, that are getting into every ball game at some point for him, and I'm like, I'm so impressed. I'm like, I don't have that. I don't have that, tool on my tool belt, basically. And I'm like, okay, well, Scott Sullivan's a great friend. He had over 600 appearances in the big leagues. Chad Bradford's a friend, Mississippi boy, so you got Moneyball with Chad Bradford, and he's scraping his knuckles. I'm like, I just want to get better at it. I just want to learn. And that's how good, people are awesome. So it's Scott Sullivan, Chad Bradford. Would you come together? And we did camps for 3 or 4 years. We called drop down camps, and we built it. And when we started, young people, it was like, all right, submariner is basically for the guy that can't get anybody out and he's about to get cut and he better do something.
Yeah.
It's probably like Wakefield as an outfielder. Now he's got to, here's the knuckleball.
Yeah.
It's the end of the rope type deal to be a submariner, unless you're, Jacoby or one of those guys that were just awesome. There's so many guys that you saw at the highest level. It's amazing when you watch amateur baseball, how you see the vanilla. And when you watch Baseball Tonight, you see the exact opposite.
Yeah, everybody's different.
That is the pursuit, Yeah. So when I watch amateur baseball, I still see the British Redcoats marching in formation, and they're just in lockstep, and, it really doesn't work. And when I see cones and everybody throwing at the same distance, it scares me. And then when you watch the highest level, it looks like chaos, but it's just it's working to the individual, is what I'm seeing. And I got those two guys together, and now it is awesome to see where people are reaching out to us because they think we're the submarine guy. So all you're trying to do is you're trying to figure out in your mind how to be competitive, how to get that pitcher in your program that may add another element or piece like it did for Coach Tanner and those guys. And, I wanted to learn the skill. So Scott and Chad helped a ton. And, little things like, putting your back spike in the ground where you can get your whole foot down and you can stay in a lane, for a pitcher to be able to bend at the waist and really embrace, a weaker position and stabilize right there. And I know that the back and everything is so important. That's part of your world there, but how important it is for that back. But, human nature, because of this weaker position, as a young submariner starts going to the plate, all they want to do is arch up to try to find that stronger. It's just, the human body is trying to get to a stronger position, but what you really try to teach a submarine guy is to accept that weaker position. The goal is to make 80 look like 90. It's not to make 90 look like 80, so, those are some of the big things that you just start learning initially with these guys. And then, when you're facing that opposite hitter, the goal isn't if you're a righty and if you're a submarine righty and you're facing a lefty, that lefty gets the advantage of probably seeing the ball a little bit longer. And, the goal isn't to embarrass him. It's to really just be careful and take the sting out of his swing and position your defense. A submarine guy, if I'm a right-handed submarine guy and a left-hander gets in the box, man, I'm moving people. I'm getting my second baseman in the 4-hole. I'm looking at my left fielder, moving him to the line. Those are the next step things that you get when you find the experts in the field, and we learned a ton.
Absolutely. I'm curious. There's obviously two ways for, a release point to drop, right? Either the arm action can stay the same and the lateral trunk tilt can change. So that would be consistent with, what we see with like, say a Bradford or an Adam Simber, or even like Steve Cishek's one of our guys who does that as well. And then there's also guys who will actually lower an arm action where the trunk tilt might actually not change. Do you find one is easier or harder to coach, given the sample size you've had?
No, I just think it's such a feel thing. I think the most success that I've had in doing this for close to a decade now is just speaking in terms of maintaining a ratio, the shoulder, the elbow, and the hand. And so I try to keep reminding them of what it was like to be an upright thrower.
Yeah.
because that's what they've been so much their whole life. It's like you're an upright thrower, so what does that ratio look like? And as you move to your slot, that ratio should remain. And that's why we want to stabilize and stay there. You know, what's so neat is usually the guys that are more at the 90-degree angle, like a Scott Sullivan, the two seam is usually preferred because you're trying to get sink on the baseball, or you get that natural sink. And Chad Bradford was so uncommon and so unique. You know, he was basically taking his strike zone and turning it upside down. He was trying to make his breaking ball go up, and he was actually throwing a four seam.
That's incredible.
Because now that spin on the baseball of a four seam, when you're way down there, a two seam's not going to do anything but go right in the ground.
Yeah.
In theory, the four seam's like coming up and back down. You know, like a dolphin going through the water. And it's fascinating how, you know, once you get a delivery. Not talking about mechanics per se, but once you get a delivery, your arsenal has to match it.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're the submarine guy also, if you remember back to when you threw an overhand curveball, well, really, once you're at your submarine position, I know it's not over the top 12-6, but now it's 3-9, but it's really throwing that same breaking ball from this new posted spot, if you will. And we call them sliders, you know, with the submarine guys, but really the mentality is throwing an overhand breaking ball from that posted new spot that you're trying to pitch from.
That's really interesting. All right, so we're gonna shift gears a little bit and actually talk about, I guess, the business of college sports a little bit. So I distinctly remember us having a conversation. It was the last night of Tournament of Stars back in Cary, North Carolina. We walked from the Embassy Suites to whatever the restaurant was next door in 2015, and we were talking about the modern college recruiting world. And you were still at Mississippi State at the time, and I distinctly remember, you know, in that conversation, you commenting on just the sheer volume of outreach that you were receiving at an SEC program at that time. Would you say that the outsiders have no appreciation for just how many parents / kids reach out to SEC programs on a daily basis about playing at that level?
Yeah, it's awesome. I mean, all the neat things like me and you being able to connect whenever we want to is amazing. You know, this world is going to keep moving into a connection from that standpoint. You know, emails used to be a deal where I couldn't leave the office without returning every one of them. That was the mandate from my head coach. Mm-hmm. Now I don't think I could keep a job if I had to actually do that. And you can tell when, you know, a lot of things are mass produced. I think I'm like anybody else. I like the personal individual connection. And I feel like we've lost that a little bit. Hey, in 2002, when I was working at Georgia, you know, I was the pitching coach and the recruiting coordinator. Man, that would be a really tough job in 2020.
Holy cow.
You know, but you could identify a player and track them and build a relationship for 6 months to a year before you make a decision. You know, our world has gotten to a point now where it's blink. And when we get a connection from somebody, a great relationship that we have, from our Rolodex of maybe we've gotten a great player in the past, or there's been a real trust standpoint, we have to act upon it today.
Yeah. Because
a lot of this recruiting today is, you know, I used to think about Gilligan's Island. I'd get off the bus and I'd go in from school and I'd watch Gilligan's Island, and the little jingle there, their music would say a 3-hour tour. And it seems like all you got to do is go on campus, look at the facility, see the bling, look around a little bit. You really can't connect with a coach until you're like a junior. Mm-hmm. But a lot of this recruiting is happening in the freshman, sophomore space. So I just, you know, how it's changed so much. It's not rocket science, but this stuff has turned into a blink, and decisions are made on a blink. Mm-hmm. As opposed to the way we used to do it. Hey, and I'm not saying which one's better or not.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is that we all have to constantly adjust. And if you're not willing to adjust, I mean, we're seeing this in Major League Baseball now. We're seeing how a new way is ushered in of thinking, and it's starting to be processed now. I want to stay in the space. I want to stay relative. I'm trying to figure out how to blink, how to make this work for our program, while still holding on to some principles in my mind of, like, you know, I think Tim Hudson is not only was a great pitcher, that hopefully, goes on that Hall of Fame ballot next year. But I think he's an unbelievable man that can focus for a long period of time and has a ton to give back. And I've never been happier to have somebody on my staff than him. Gabe Gross has played in the World Series. He's been a first rounder out of our program. I still want people to get to know our people. Carl Nonemaker's our recruiting coordinator. I can't tell you how much more time he spends on recruiting than I did in 2002. Yeah. It's amazing how gifted he is and how much he does for our program. And there's not a lot of time left over for a beautiful wife and a couple of kids he's trying to raise. It has just changed and changed and changed. And I still believe John Maxwell put it the best when you start talking about a position of leadership or building your group. At the end of the day, you get who you are, not who you want. Mm-hmm. But I got to find a way for our program, just like other great head coaches throughout the country, to market, to manage, to present our program in a quick fashion, because my people are our strength.
Yeah.
Of our program, of Auburn University, it's our people. You're going to have great examples, people to invest in you. Your son's going to turn into a man. Mm-hmm. But I think we're a deeper level of people having to pay attention. But I still hang my hat on you get who you are, not always who you want.
What are, with this, the sheer volume of people who are, interested in playing for an Auburn, what advice would you give to the high school players and parents? Like, where are they making their mistakes in that outreach? Do you have like certain recruiting pet peeves that drive you bonkers as you work your way through that?
I just think, sometimes you get one shot at that email or that correspondence. Does that make sense? You get that one direct connection. So if I need something from you, Eric, I need to specifically get straight to the point. Mm-hmm. I don't need to know that you and the lab played in the backyard when you were 4, wiffle ball. I just get right to the point. And then I think it's really smart of like, I have a sincere interest. And it's because of the level of baseball that you guys play, because you're in the Southeastern Conference. I'm specifically interested in this degree, and your school has it. Mm-hmm. And these are the people that know me the best that should be respected in your community.
I love that.
And then I would love to hear from you. That would be impressive. Mm-hmm. And that is impressive.
Let's go on record. Can you absolutely tell the difference between an email written by a kid versus one written by a parent?
Absolutely. Always. And it's their work, right?
Yep.
Because when they get to us, I'm not going to have mom and dad out there practicing 4 hours a day with us. It's going to be the boy. And then once you do get those face-to-face encounters, thinking about your question, what's jumping in my head is the respect. If you have a mom and a dad or whatever guardian and a player sitting there, cutting off a parent or showing any lack of disrespect or talking about whatever your high school coach or summer coach or somebody training you and them not doing a good job and they've held me back, just remember we're coaches too.
Yeah.
And, a lack of respect would probably translate right to us.
That's a great point.
I still believe I'm looking for somebody that has been, raised well, that's going to add value. This is a two-way street. And, we got a heart where we want to reach out and help everybody. But this is an SEC locker room.
Yep.
We're looking for the brightest, sharpest, the most well-rounded. We don't want just I want it all. I want a person. I want a student and I want an athlete. And I don't think we have to sell short with our program on any of those features to the best of our ability.
I'm curious, and I think you probably answered this question indirectly because you do such a good job prospecting and trying to find the right people. But, I've heard stories from various college sports about how they sometimes have to unrecruit players when they arrive on campus. I feel like Nick Saban spoke about this in the past. I remember Tim Corbin, after their national championship year at Vanderbilt, talked about making their team like earn the gold star on their black shirts in the fall. Have you had experiences where players that arrive are so accustomed to being showered with praise during the recruiting process, or, guys that maybe were draft candidates who opted not to sign, where you actually had to bring them down a peg, tactfully when they arrived? Or is that something you haven't experienced?
Well, I love what John Cohen used to do. He used to do pride versus responsibility. And it's a great way to look at it because, pretty much our lineup here before our season was so abruptly ended, if you look at our lineup 1 through 9, I would imagine 8 of the 9, almost every guy, probably where they came from, were hitting in the 3-hole.
Mm-hmm.
All of them.
Yeah.
So they're the best one from their hometown. Everybody's been beating the drum, and somebody's got to hit 9th for us.
Yeah.
When Gabe Gross makes this lineup out, somebody's hitting 9th, and he's probably been a 3-hole hitter his whole life. And, there becomes this pride versus responsibility. I still think these guys want to be great. Mm-hmm. They want to pursue it. I think they're bigger, faster, stronger than ever. We talked about the tick up in velocity, and these guys are special athletes, but I do think they're the most distracted group that's ever come through because of these phones that are in our hands, the information that's going through their mind. Mental health's a big deal now.
Yeah.
And stress and anxiety seems more real than it's ever been. These kids are awesome. Mm-hmm. Most of our kids, the vast majority of our kids were raised outstanding. Mm-hmm. But I tell you, we have the most success in the development of a player by reducing distractions.
Yeah.
It's really less is more from you need to just focus on this, this, and this. Who you're running with is more important than it's ever been. Roger Bannister broke the 4-minute mile on May 6, 1954, but he didn't want to run that day. But the two people he was running with, Chris Chataway and Chris Brasher, is like, oh, we're running. But really who you're training with, who you're working to get it simple. They say the number is like 150 relationships that you can really manage. And I got, 4,000 in my phone here when I look at contacts.
Interesting.
How do I keep up with the group that I need to be growing, developing, and influencing? And how can I let some other stuff go that I just can't control? Mm-hmm. How can I help one person this week? Because there's a lot of anxiety involved when I sat down 8 days ago and I go like, hey, I got to go help the world. Because baseball coaches are, I think, amazing. They have to do more with less. There's a lot of different things to figure out. There's different types of athletes on their team. Mm-hmm. And you're always wanting to make a difference as a leader and you want to help people out. But then at the end of the day, you get more done by going like, okay, I'm going to go help this person and that person. And you get more done. This information, it's just an overload. And when we can peel back and make things simpler for not only ourselves, but this age group, mm-hmm. the first thing we do is take some of those rocks out of their backpack, figure out who they are, mm-hmm. and let's go to work. And it's really a simplification because these guys that we're getting, man, they got a lot to live up to. Yeah. They're trying to get to Omaha, win it. They're trying to be a first rounder. And it's like, oh, big fella, this is really what we need to do. Yeah. We need to get to this class on time. We need to make sure we're eating right and sleeping right. And let's just slow down mm-hmm. and let's really get a process going. And let's be part of something bigger than ourselves. And I think we're just building things in here that we're going through the same things. I want to win. We want to do well. But really with this age group, these young guys that are coming through right now, what's important now in a simplification, we're seeing more results.
I love it. All right. So I'm going to tell a brief story that leads into what I hope will be a really good question. So the second Friday of every month here in Jupiter, Florida is food trucks in Abacoa. So right outside Roger Dean Stadium, which is the Marlins and the Cardinals spring training, there's, 30 food trucks out there. So our daughters love to go. So my wife and I took them on a Friday night and it coincided with World Wood Bat, the big, underclassmen, fall ball tournament that takes place down here. So my wife and I took our girls one night. We're walking through the parking lot on the way back to our car. And sure enough, we bump into Matt Blake, who at the time was with the Indians, is now the pitching coach for the New York Yankees. And Matt and I were talking, and sure enough, Butch Thompson comes walking along too, there to recruit. So we had the greatest connection, I think, in the history of the baseball world, randomly in a parking lot, as the sun went down. And so I remember my kids were climbing all over creation because we were racing to get them home to bed. And you and I had a good conversation going while Matt was talking to my wife. And we were catching up, and you commented on how you've been digging in deeply on the topic of fear with your own research. And I was super intrigued, and the girls were being absolute maniacs, and we're like, all right, we got to go home and go to bed. And then we put them in bed, and I turned to my wife, I'm like, Anna, I'm really curious what Butch was talking about. And you piqued my interest for the last, 5 or 6 months. So here's your chance to share what you've learned about fear and what drew you to actually look into it.
And I think most coaches that have, we've worked Jupiter for more than 2 decades, a lot of us, and scouts, anybody listen to this, they have that image of us being in those grass parking lots. Yep. And it's rainy, it's dark, so your shoes and and it's a dark parking lot. It's just great baseball. You're setting a scene, and I could put myself, and I know so many others can as well. There's so much fear, is such a huge topic today. And this was the journey that we went on last year. I think the awareness clicked in for me, and it started layering, so I had like 5 things happen last year from a point of fear. And, there's books and all these things, but this is kind of mine, from that experience of last year's ball club. The first one was from Coach Dye. Pat Dye is probably the legendary coach at Auburn. It's Pat Dye Field there at Auburn, and he's still around. He's still an encouragement, for sure. He loves our players and our program. And he just talked about, man, fear's real. I'm like, you're coaching in a game. You're coaching like in the Iron Bowl. There's some fear, unless you're lying. You're a big 300-pound player out there. There's still some fear associated with playing. So that realization, but he's like, at the end of the day, your courage has just got to be greater than your fear.
Yep.
And that really stuck with me. And that was the first message that I think our team got in regards to fear, is your courage has got to be greater. We get to Omaha, and we got an astronaut, Jim Voss, who, was an Auburn grad, works out at Colorado now teaching. He's the longest spacewalk in the history of NASA.
Wow.
So Jim spent almost 9 hours, 8 hours and 56 minutes out there, longer than any other astronaut. And I'm like, once I got kicked up on this fear thing, Jim came to Omaha with his daughter and said, can he speak to the team and see the team and just meet the team? So, it'd been Auburn's first time to go to Omaha last year in 22 years. So, a lot of people that love Auburn and love baseball were excited, which is so neat. But he made that journey. And, when he got through talking, I talked about, almost 9 hours out there. And at the time, not everybody was coming back. And we've had some tough times in NASA of, some of our astronauts and some of these special missions not returning. And I said, how did you deal with your fear? And he just paused, just a very smart man. He's an Army Ranger as well. Just a ton of respect for Jim. And he's like, I think my preparation was greater than my fear. And he said, Butch, I've been doing that walk for 20 years. I knew my job so much. I think I prepared so well that fear really wasn't in my mind. It was like, what is my task?
That's awesome.
But when he said, I've been doing that for 20 years, my preparation was greater than my fear. And something's got to limit it. I took the team over to, the third feature was last fall. I took the team to, Fort Benning, because it's only 45 minutes away. It's an easy bus ride. And that's where, if you're going to be an Army Ranger, you got to go through Fort Benning.
Yeah.
And Colonel Scarpola, a 36-year Army man, was running a group and met with our team and put our team through the paces. It's pretty neat that an Army Ranger can go through the Malvesti confidence course in about, under 5 minutes. And an SEC ball player, it takes about 17 minutes. It's a lot of respect for those Army Rangers.
Wow.
But I said, here I go again. I go like Colonel Scarpola. How does an Army Ranger deal with fear? He said an Army Ranger deals with fear because of their trust into their person to their left and to their right.
That's good.
And that's where I mention like who you're running with. That's where I mention like you want to take the focus off of you and put it with your group. Young people, coaches, it don't matter. If you're going to live life, the people that you run with, having a Paul, a mentor, and a Barnabas, a brother, and a young person that you're building up, having a framework and having the right people to your left and right. That's how I bet go down the road. You are so successful, but I guarantee you there's somebody to your left and right. There's a Chris Chataway and a Chris Brasher that made you run faster, that encouraged you, that kept teaching you how to aim high. I love Les Brown when he says, hey, people don't fail because they aim high and miss. It's because they aim low and hit. But your people has got to be greater than your fear. And then perseverance. We had a couple of our guys, we've been trying to pursue Omaha for the last couple of years. 2 years ago, we're at Florida and we're the last team not to qualify because a ball in extra innings in game 3 of a super regional bounced off our right fielder's glove and went over the fence to end it. And I knew my culture, my ball club was okay because my whole team went to right field before we were able to come back and shake Florida's hands for going to the World Series. But, this past year of being able to make it to the College World Series, we're sitting there against the number 3 national seed, Georgia Tech. We're down not only to our last out, but our last strike. The perseverance became greater than our fear for a player like Stephen Williams because there was redemption because his perseverance was greater than his fear. With that 2 strikes, he had a walk-off grand slam. That's what sport is so great about. And then the next year at North Carolina, I'm talking about great programs, great coaches, storied programs, men that you respect, that you want your program to emulate and be a lot like. I really wanted Cody Greenhill to throw the last pitch of a super regional to get us to Omaha for the first time in 22 years. And the biggest reason why is because Cody Greenhill is the one that threw the pitch that bounced off of Stephen Williams' glove that went over the fence that ended our season. So we're right back this past year in a game 3 of a super regional, and Cody Greenhill records the last out to get us there. Our perseverance has to be greater than our fear. And then, finally, I just to keep from getting too long-winded, the 5th statement for me of where this has really come into play is, your faith's got to be greater than your fear. Mm-hmm. And there's a great Auburn fan, Kurt Stevens from Atlanta, Georgia, who we lost him. We've lost him here in the last few months, and he moved into a hospice situation. He has a beautiful family, and I went to see him, and I asked if I could come see him, and I got to come see him 3 or 4 days before he passed. And he was always an encourager. I'd kind of touch base with him and connected with him during his whole process here of his cancer and his walk. But every time I called him, he lifted me up. I'm worried about a ball game, and he's always like, Coach, man, it's awesome. It's great. You stay with it. And I got to him, and I was like, he knows this is it. And I'm like, Kurt, I've been doing this thing on fear. And he said, you know what? And he pointed to his wife, and he talked about his boys. And he's like, that's what really sucks is that I'm leaving them. I really, really love them. I don't want to. But he's like, you know what? My faith is greater than my fear. God's promises is greater, than my fear. That's huge.
Yeah.
And, you look at Matthew 22, you go verses 35 through 40. I mean, just our greatest commandment to love God with all your heart. And then second like it, love your neighbor. We need some of that right now, but,
You're not kidding.
Our courage has got to be greater than our fear, our preparation, the people we surround ourselves with our perseverance and our faith that can really minimize fear. And I think it's a good message for us all right now.
That's a tremendous one, particularly in light of the time. We're recording this on March 24th. Maybe building on that, there are a lot of people that have fear about the status of baseball right now. So I'm curious to get your take on that. Let's talk about the unfortunate situation throughout baseball, particularly with respect to college. What are the challenges that they're still working through, as we move this forward? Obviously, this year's season was canceled. We don't know what's going down with summer ball. Do you have some thoughts?
I think I'm like most people. You like, okay, this is your challenge. Here's the mountain. Get to the top of it.
Mhm.
That's kind of as a coach, as a ball player, as a competitor. It's like, all right, it's on. Um, this one's different, right?
Yeah.
This one we can't we can't see. We don't have answers.
Mhm.
And I think our players want guidance. They want direction. That's what they're built off of. Put me in, coach.
Mhm.
Teach me how to do this.
Yeah.
How do I make this breaking ball better?
Yep.
And we can't even connect with them. And then our parents, our players are being connected with by our staff every day.
Mhm.
But I think we really found ourselves, that sport should willingly take a back seat currently.
Mhm.
And this is one of those moments that's bigger than ball. And there's a lot of gaps to be filled in. But it's the unknown. And I've never seen it before. I think about the greatest generation. They were asked to take up arms and go fight overseas, or, either, maybe you stay here and you work and you provide for the cause. And they're called the greatest generation because they fought for our freedom. And we're asked, myself included, is to go home and chill.
Yeah.
It's not normal.
Yeah.
None of this has been normal, but it's been very real. And, the best we can do is heed the advice as it comes. Things are changing rapidly. People are saying it's going to get worse before it gets better. This is a great time to grow, to maybe be pruned, but to grow.
Yeah.
And to go through some things. And, leaders, I think, are just putting forth a mood right now. I think leaders are putting forth like if my players were standing in front of me right now, I would say it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
Now, who are we, and what do we rest our laws on, and what is the one thing we should be doing? Who can we be helping? Just understanding the precautions. What are the rules to the game that we have now? Everything's changed, and we need to change. I love Legacy by James Carr.
Yeah. Great book.
And, one of his deals is like, hey, there's growth and then there's decline. And the All Blacks, they go for that gap. That's probably why they haven't, experienced so much decline, is because they change while they're on top.
Mhm.
It's been a week now. Let's figure out the world's a little different. Our world's a little different. Let's change while we're on top here and see what we need to be doing in light of the changes.
Yeah, so many people have been talking about everything that's wrong, and certainly there's a lot wrong right now. I think very few people have talked about the opportunity it presents. Like I was joking with my wife, this is probably the longest vacation we've had since our honeymoon in 2011. Get more time with our girls, but also, more opportunity to do professional development stuff, whether it's watching, a lot of in-services, whether it's reading books that have been, stockpiling on the bureau next to our bed, or, to be honest, like I talk to a lot of athletes, like there are things that you never focus on because they're not sexy, right? Working on your flexibility, like for players, going back and watching game film of, classic events, like seeing how they were played, how they were managed, all those things. There's so many ways that people can get better, even if they can't be out on a baseball field or in a weight room. There's always some low hanging fruit. And I think a lot of people are too busy, on the fear side of things to start appreciating that there's an opportunity waiting right behind it.
I think it's great. I told our guys the other night, this is an opportunity. Once we return to baseball, I think there's going to be a separation, because some guys are going to attack this phase personally for themselves to keep strength in their mind, the strongest tool that they possess. Mm-hmm. If anybody is interested in their craft right now and goes and really works on their craft or really gets stronger, I mean, those are going to be the best coming out of this thing, because I think there is a human nature tendency to lay it down right now.
Yep.
So that guy that keeps his axe sharp right now is going to come out ahead. There's no doubt, once we, of course, move past this moment.
That's awesome. Well, we always, at the end of each podcast, we always rock a lightning round. So this is where I ask a quick question, and your response can be as long as you want, but I'm curious to get your takes, and you actually just kind of hinted at some of these first couple. So what's one book that you think every player should read?
in the last few months, Chop Wood, Carry Water by Josh Metcalf.
Mm-hmm.
When I talk about just the simplicity of it takes a long time to do something instead of you just getting it right now, this book does that. It does some stuff for teamwork, but it lets you know that you just keep working on your craft and it takes a period of time. Don't just do it and move on. This one sits here and you see over a period of 10 years to become a samurai archer is not just happening overnight. I also love, if you're the captain of your team,
Mm-hmm.
I want you to read The Score Takes Care of Itself by Bill Walsh. I thought it was fascinating.
Classic.
And just a lot of good points. And I think it still stands the test of time.
That's great. How about the coaches out there? What's one book every coach should read?
Yeah, I feel like most people have read Legacy, although it's probably the most impactful
it's a good one.
book for me in the last 5 years. It's James, Kerr, but it's pronounced Carr. And then Go Giver by Bob Berg is 5 good, common sense, quick read that I think would give some great bullet points and make you a better leader.
I gotcha. Well, we touched on this a little bit earlier, but I'm going to ask it anyway because you might answer it differently or give something unique. If you go back in time and give Butch Thompson some advice 20 or 30 years ago as a young coach, what would it be?
Yeah, make it about whoever you're trying to serve and lift up.
I love it.
It's going to make a difference for you. It is the best way to grow yourself. If you make this about you and not who you're trying to connect with or invest in, it's a tougher road.
All right. Favorite coaching memory?
There's so many special moments. There's so many heartbreaking moments that'll never leave me. It's just that feeling of euphoria that you start in August and, I think this is year 29 for me and been to 8 World Series. It's that euphoric moment of when you know you made it to that World Series. Or, 2001, we won the whole deal under, Coach Shoup was our leader at Birmingham Southern NAIA, and just that euphoric, that real emotion. I still love real emotion when you can see somebody explode of their whole life working on this sport or this whole season's investment come out, in 5 minutes time. I like that real emotion of euphoria so much more than I like hitting a double and whatever kind of, hand signals we're giving at second base, the manufactured emotion. I just love those moments, those brief moments of just real emotion.
I love that. So we have a lot of kids and their parents who listen to this podcast together. That's actually been one of the biggest surprises to me is how often they did that. I know you've got 3 girls yourself, so I'm sure you spent a lot of time listening to stuff in the car together. So with that said, both from a parent and a coaching standpoint, if you could give one bit of advice to the kids, what would it be? And also one bit of advice for the parents.
Yeah, I think I've already mentioned the aim high. That's kind of my go-to. You've got to aim high and you've got to work hard and you've got to be wanting to make a difference. Unless you are Jordan, unless you are Bo Jackson, you're not going to be able to just step over people. You're going to need people along with you on your journey. And, Ignaz Paderewski, I guess I hadn't mentioned the work hard concept. Ignaz was a famous Polish pianist, and he was one of the world's best, but he talked about hard work, and he said, if I don't practice for 1 day, I know it. Mm-hmm. And if I don't practice for 2 days, the orchestra knows it. And if I don't practice for 3 days, the whole world knows it. Whatever our craft is, like, this is a blessing for me to be with you, Eric, because this is me trying to do whatever I can to be a decent coach and keep my act sharp, during this time.
Yeah.
But every player and everybody that has a skill, I think you have to look at it that way. That if you don't keep working on your skill, you're going to know it.
Yeah.
And then, your team or your family is going to know it after a little bit of time. And if you don't work on it for a while, then whatever your craft is, when we come out of all this, the whole world's going to know it.
I love it. What about the parents? If you could give them a bit of advice as they go through these recruiting processes, or have a player playing at that level.
Yeah, it's just back to, do you love your kid or do you love them if they're a great player? But just love your kid. At the end of the day, if you aim as high as possible, you may not, get what you want, but you may always get what you need. It might wind up being the career that you're supposed to have instead of that goal that you wanted. By pursuing something good, you may wind up getting, surrounded by the right certain people. I think about Ecclesiastes 9:10. It says, "Whatever your hands find to do, do it with all your might." and that's why you got to work hard, because you got to love your children, and you provide for them the best you can to give them opportunities. We just have to be careful when we do everything for them. Don't take away their ability. John Cohen, I've taken it when I left him to our program of FIO, figure it out. Mm-hmm. Don't take that mentality out of your child because you do so much for them.
Absolutely.
Don't give them everything they want. Give them what they need, and make sure that they still have this light bulb centered around figuring it out for themselves.
Yeah. Set the guardrails, right? Let them figure it out within those confines.
That's right.
That's great stuff. Butch, thank you so much for doing this. I actually really learned a ton myself, and as expected, our conversations always prove fruitful. Your Twitter is 3strikes_AU. Always have some good stuff that you're sharing on there, and certainly we wish you and Auburn baseball well as we work our way out of this conundrum as an industry on the whole, and really appreciate you taking the time to jump on the call.
I keep taking care of that beautiful family, and thank you for all that you do for our great sport. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the CSP Elite Baseball Development Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd be thrilled if you'd consider subscribing to the podcast and leaving us a review to read on iTunes. We welcome your suggestions for future guests and questions. Just email elitebaseballpodcast@gmail.com. Thank you for your continued support, and we'll see you next episode.